Welcome to Movie Quotes and Recaps. In this movie, I am going to recap the Adjustment Bureau. David Norris, an up-and-coming senatorial candidate, makes a public appearance. Norris seems very much a people's candidate, always interacting with people and always empathetic towards their needs. NBC newsreader Chuck Scarborough makes a news report on Norris, increasing an already 6-point lead over his opponent. Norris next appears on The Jon Stewart Show, where Stewart remarks how 8 years ago, Norris started his career as a congressional candidate that began with a bang, or a bust. The night he was elected, he was involved in a bar fight and charged with disorderly conduct. Norris is making more public appearances, being endorsed by NYC Mayor Mike Bloomberg and GQ magazine, and introducing his campaign manager, Charlie Traynor, who says that Norris is up 10 points. He even rides a Coast Guard patrol vessel. At another public appearance, a man in a tan beret cap, Harry Mitchell, is seen watching and politely applauding, though he doesn't appear enthused. Norris's campaign is like a comet with no signs of slowing down. It's just about crunch time for election day when a campaign aide rushes up to Charlie, showing him bad news. Then 4 men in suits and hats walk across a roof. Among them are Mitchell and Richardson. Richardson says the 4 of them have their work cut out for them. At the end of the dialogue, he only says, "Let's get him back on track." During election night, Norris enters a hotel suite and turns on a news program on CNN. In the news report, a huge portion of Norris' constituents and voter base have turned against him based on the exposé in the Post. Journalist Mary Matlin talks about how Norris overcame the loss of his entire family to become the youngest person ever elected to the House of Representatives, but the barroom fight was added to the exposé photo to make Norris look immature and impulsive. Norris is now trailing his opponent in the polls by a margin almost as significant as his earlier lead. Mitchell is grimly looking at a ledger-like book when his cell phone rings. He's being questioned by his superior, Richardson. At Norris's hotel, he and Traynor are watching election poll results come in. Norris is defeated in the vote counts for Suffolk County and Brooklyn. NBC News coverage predicts this landslide defeat for Norris even before all the county voting polls are complete. Norris walks off alone to work on a concession speech. He goes into the men's room to think. As he puts together his concession speech, he finally hears noise from one of the private stalls, showing it's occupied by a woman. Elise comes out of the stall, barefoot and holding her shoes. She explains that she'd been in there hiding from security after she crashed a wedding on a dare. She was in the stall when Norris entered and, too scared to come out and admit that she was in a men's room, ended up inadvertently listening to him work on his speech. She recognizes Norris and understands that he's lost the election. The two start to bond right away, with Elise admitting she thought Norris's reunion prank was amusing. Suddenly, Norris and Elise start kissing passionately, having very quickly grown infatuated with each other. The kiss is interrupted by Traynor, who enters the restroom to fetch David for his concession speech. Norris hurries out after Elise in hopes of arranging to see her again, but hotel security arrives in search of her, and she takes off immediately. Norris's concession speech starts out moving and powerful, but suddenly he starts speaking candidly about how his campaign analyzed and consulted, paying large amounts of money to professional consultants over the color of his tie and how much his shoes should be scuffed. As he takes off one shoe to show his supporters, camera flashbulbs go off. In the morning, Richardson meets Mitchell in a park at sunrise, and tells him that Norris has to spill coffee on his shirt no later than 7:05 a.m. Mitchell assures Richardson he'll get Norris as soon as he enters the park. Norris wakes up and dresses, listening to a morning financial news report. He is no longer a congressman, but his concession speech was electrifying to the point of making him a front-runner in the next upcoming Senate race. Mitchell fell asleep while waiting in the park. While Norris walks to the bus stop, he wakes up just in time to see Norris board his bus. He grabs his book from his inside pocket and looks at it in alarm. Desperate, he starts running after the bus. As Norris boards the bus, he is stunned to find Elise. He sits down beside her as she wakes up. The two instantly began reconnecting. As the bus stops, Mitchell catches up. He checks his watch and gestures at the bus. Then Norris spills his coffee on Elise's skirt. A second later, Mitchell is hit hard from behind by a taxicab. He insists to the gathering crowd that he's okay and is more concerned about his book. He looks inside it, and a graph-like display of lines starts to change in a way that Mitchell notes with displeasure. In the meantime, Norris and Elise are continuing to talk, and it's clear they're both flirting. When Norris's BlackBerry rings, she playfully grabs it out of his pocket and sticks it into his coffee. She writes her name and number on a card for Norris so he can call her later. Norris arrives at the RSR offices and greets several workers without noticing that they seem frozen in time. He enters the conference room to find Richardson and his men, one of whom is waving a strange instrument over Traynor, who is frozen in time. Richardson orders Norris to be seized. Norris flees, but at every turn he finds more of Richardson's men converging on him, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. Richardson himself continues to appear in front of Norris at every turn. Norris manages to lock himself inside Trainer's office and frantically dials 911. Richardson's men come through the locked door as if it weren't locked. Norris is grabbed, coliformed, and dragged through one of the doors into an empty warehouse. Norris awakens, listening in complete confusion as Richardson tells his men that Norris has to be reset, but the chairman would never sign an order approving it. He listens to Richardson and another man arguing over him in terms that Norris has no clue as to what they mean. Finally, Richardson approaches Norris and follows his colleague's advice, telling Norris that they are a group called the Adjustment Bureau, tasked with making sure things go according to plan. How current events are supposed to go and how people's lives are supposed to be lived. The Adjustment Bureau works to correct minor deviations from the plan. Of course, Norris thinks that Richardson is nuts, but Richardson proves that he is able to read Norris's mind, and further, he's able to bend up a small piece of floor to trip Norris when he tries to run just by pointing at that piece of floor. Some time later, David is in a small bar, trying to recall Elisa's phone number from memory. Harry arrives, wondering why David is fixated on one woman when his whole world has been turned upside down. He tells David that even if he remembered the number, the Bureau would make sure the call never went through. Then Harry told David to meet him at 4 p.m. ferry since it was not safe for them to talk in the bar. On the boat, David asks Harry a few questions. Harry explains to David that they are just changing the way Charlie weighs his investment risk, and they can't read his mind. Harry can tell that he is important to the Bureau because of the amount of resources they are using to keep him away from Elise, so he advises David just to move on. 3 years later, Norris has tried to do as Harry recommended. But for 3 years, he continues to ride the same bus every day where he met Elise, and one day, David spots her walking down the street. He gets off the bus and runs after her. Elise is surprised to see David but finds her reception of him a little cooler. David asks her for a walk, which she agrees to. But at the same time, an agent of the Bureau walks into Richardson's office to inform him that David is off the plan. Back with David and Elise. While they were walking, David explained that he had lost her number. She did not believe it at first, but when David made the promise in his parents' grave, she Googled his name and got 757,000 results, none of which were hers. When both of them are going to a restaurant to have breakfast, Richardson is already inside. He hurries into action and cuts the power to a studio where Elise performs. Suddenly Charlie appeared. David is surprised, then Charlie reminds him about his speech on the Brooklyn Bridge. He invites Elise to watch, but she can't go because of her rehearsal. Elise tells David not to cancel his speech and that he is only on Pier 17, right next to the bridge. When they were about to kiss, Harry interrupted them. And Richardson succeeded in stopping them from reaching their ripple limits. At the Brooklyn Bridge, while David is making his speech, Elise receives a message that the rehearsal is back at Cedar Lake, not Pier 17. When the speech ends, David and Charlie are heading away. He happens to spot Richardson observing him from a window. Glancing back and forth between the window and Pier 17, David figures out what Richardson has done. Then he told Charlie he needed to get to Pier 17 and handle his interview for him. When he reaches the venue, he finds it close. Then he tries to call Cedar Lake, but his call is dropped. He then tries to call via hardline, but to no avail. While Richardson is looking at the plan and anticipating what he will do next. Then he cuts all phone signals within a 3-block radius. Richardson decided to confront David and remind him that Elise is off limits. David asks Richardson why they can't be together, but Richardson can't give a direct answer. David finally figures out that Richardson himself doesn't know why he and Elise can't be together. He ran across the street, entered a restaurant, and asked the people inside if any of them had heard of Cedar Lake Dance Studio and where he could find it. One of the restaurant guests does know the location. Richardson and his colleague check their plan book, now both desperate. They keep all taxicabs passing through from picking up David to give him a ride. David finally gets a taxicab to stop for him, but the cab is immediately hit hard by a car. David calls 911. But when one officer tries too hard to continue asking him questions, David figures out he's actually an Adjustment Bureau member and goes to consult with the sergeant. David flags another cab and bribes him $100 to break a few traffic laws to hurry to Cedar Lake. Richardson and McCready race desperately after David. They go through ordinary doors to use them as teleportation gates. Inflection points appear in the plan book, and they see that once David sees Elise dance, he will have reached his ripple limit. Richardson tries blocking the studio's doors, but it's too late. David is watching Elise rehearsing, then Richardson receives a call from Thompson, and David turns back to the rehearsal, enchanted at the sight of Elise dancing. After Elise finishes her rehearsal, they walk around the city. While Richardson is back in their headquarters, he learns that David and Elise were meant to be with each other on the earlier version of the plan, from the 70s, 80s, and 90s up until the plan changes in 2005. Richardson is shocked, and that's why they can't separate them. In the meantime, Elise brings David to a dance club, where they enjoy each other's company, and they end up in Elise's apartment making love. While they were sleeping, Thompson appeared in the room, watching them in silence. Elise wakes up the next morning to find David gone, but suddenly she receives a call from her ex-boyfriend while David is entering her room to bring some coffee. After the call, she explained to David that they broke up because she couldn't forget him. David brings Elise with him as he leaves to be interviewed on the Jon Stewart show. A crew member for the show tells Elise that Norris asked him to tell her that he was just called into an urgent meeting, but he'll call her when he's done, and that he'll see her tonight at Cedar Lake. But the crew member is actually a member of the Bureau, and as he opens a door for Norris, he passes through to find himself in the warehouse where he'd been taken by Richardson before. The door he'd just gone through is now locked, and he's trapped there, and he knows why. Thompson arrives at the warehouse and introduces himself. After a brief exchange about the nature of free will, Thompson finally reveals why the Adjustment Bureau is so set on keeping him separated from Elise. He was supposed to meet her once. The meeting in the men's room of the hotel was intentional because talking to her there inspired him to give the concession speech that pulled him out of the brink of political ruin to become the front-runner he is today for the U.S. Senate, and that he's destined not only to be a great senator but a great U.S. president. However, if he and Elise remained together, her playful, bold nature would rub off on the impulsive David, which would severely impede his ability to lead the country as president. When David insists that the core of his being is made of the choices he makes and that he chooses Elise, come what may, Thompson lets him leave the garage and says he can still catch Elise's dance recital if he hurries. David arrived just in time to watch Elise perform, but Thompson followed him and tried to reason with David again. He said when they are together, it will not only kill his dream, it will kill Elise's dream too. Finally, before Thompson leaves, he causes Elise to mistime her jump and hurt her ankle badly in the landing. David rushes Elise to the hospital. As he is sitting, Thompson arrives and tells him that what's happened is his fault. David punches him, but Thompson coolly says her ankle is only sprained, but David could end up taking away all she cares about most. David goes to see Elise in the recovery room. Her ankle is bandaged and will recover within a month. David hugs her and excuses himself to make a couple of phone calls. But as he walks through the halls of the hospital, it's clear he isn't going to return and has walked out of Elise's life. Richardson approaches Harry to report Thompson's success while Elise is being wheeled out of the hospital by one of her girlfriends. Harry looks guilty. He's begun to question if they're doing what's truly right. 11 months later, David is making a public appearance at a small local farming community. A news report gives him a staggering 16-point lead over his opponent less than a month before Election Day. Then Charlie hands David a newspaper. He knew Norris would find out about the article eventually, and he wanted to be there when he did. It shows that Elise has gotten back together with Adrian, and they're getting married in a small civil ceremony next week. Harry is seen standing in front of the warehouse, reading the same article. Elise, on the other hand, looks over her application form for a marriage license, looking troubled, while David is on the way to the small bar he usually goes to. As he walks in, Mitchell is seen walking out through the exit of the building right beside it. The bartender tells Norris that his friend just left him a message. She hands him a folded piece of paper. Then David goes to the warehouse and is met there by Harry. Harry tells David that Thompson's claim that Elise brings out a reckless, impulsive side in him was a lie. However, Elise would nonetheless impede Norris's ability to become an excellent political leader. Harry is agreeing to help David because he understands that David's personal ambitions are important but not the only thing that matters. David asks Harry to teach him how to use the doors. Harry explained to David everything. When the morning arrives, Harry leads David to a doorway that will lead into the courthouse and gives his hat to David. David runs through a door and makes a bold run through the rain. The Bureau rushes to mobilize but is unable to stop David since he also goes through the door that the Bureau uses. David arrives at the courthouse. Elise's friend saw him and said that Elise was not there. As David enters the bathroom, Elise is shocked to see David. Elise is angry at David for leaving her at the hospital. Then he asks Elise to trust him and come with him. He now tells Elise about the Adjustment Bureau. As both of them enter a door and exit a different place, Elise is shocked. Eventually, they end up on the roof of the Bureau's headquarters. Thinking the end has come upon them, David and Elise give an emotional goodbye hug and kiss. As they pull back, the intervention team is no longer there. Then Thompson appeared and told them that they could not change their fate or write their own. Harry arrived and showed Thompson a folder. And he walked away. Harry shows the new plan to David and Elise, which the chairman rewrites. It allows them to stay together and be happy. Thank you for watching Movie Quotes and Recaps. And for more videos, please hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell.